The subject of today's program is behavior. First, we'll look at the difference between what's innate and what's acquired. Then we will examine certain social behavior patterns. And finally ask ourselves, what is it that prompts people to work? How is it that little girls play with dolls, whereas little boys seem to prefer trucks? The question may well seem simplistic. Nevertheless, it causes a lot of ink to flow. It is still very difficult today to determine to what extent the difference between men's behavior and women's behavior is genetic or the result of social conditioning. The innate and acquired question has long fascinated psychologists. It is generally acknowledged that an animal's behavior depends upon its genetic heritage and on the environment in which it lives. However, certain aspects of behavior reveal themselves spontaneously without any prior experience or practice. For example, young spiders weave their first web just as easily as their elders. No sooner have they hatched than chicks start to peck about and to strike seeds and grains with their tiny beaks. It was observations such as these that led ethologists, scientists who study animal behavior, to postulate that this kind of stereotyped behavior was genetically programmed. That is, part of their species' genetic heritage. Indeed, all the members of the same species perform these behavior patterns naturally. Furthermore, every animal species has a whole repertoire of such innate or instinctive behavior patterns. In less evolved species, such as insects, fish, and birds, the innate behavior is predominant. On the other hand, in mammals, which alone have a cerebral cortex, the uppermost layer of the brain, the portion of behavior patterns that is learned is much greater. A striking example is the extraordinary ability of man, the highest mammal, to learn. However, researchers have also described a number of innate behavior patterns in human infants. Newborns will turn their eyes and head toward the sound of a human voice. They make reach and grasp motions for objects perceived in their visual field only a few hours after birth, and the sequence of the movement is comparable to that performed by an adult. For a long time, the study of instinctive behavior belonged mainly to the ethologists, while psychologists concentrated instead on the learning process, learning being defined as a fairly permanent change of behavior. Such change results from experience or practice. The most basic form of learning is associative learning, where an infant learns that certain events in the environment tend to be associated or related. Psychologists distinguish between two forms of associative learning: classic conditioning and operant conditioning. It was Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist, who first demonstrated a case of classic conditioning. Pavlov noticed that when he offered dogs meat, they would salivate. Pavlov then accompanied the meat offering with the sound of a bell, which normally does not produce any particular reaction in dogs. By associating the bell with the food, the dogs eventually would salivate at the sound of the bell alone. Through classic conditioning, newborn infants learn, for example, that the presence of their mother or the bottle is associated with feeding. Simply seeing these will sometimes calm a ravenous and impatient baby. Phobias are intense fears that can develop in the same way as other reactions learned through classic conditioning. For instance, a person who once had a traumatic experience with a dog may be intensely afraid at the mere sight of a dog. The dog, once a neutral stimulus, will now cause intense fear through a classic type of conditioning. Another type of associative learning that plays an instrumental role in the everyday life of human beings and many animals is operant conditioning. The American psychologist Frederick Skinner performed a laboratory experiment that illustrated this phenomenon. He put a starving rat into a cage. The rat learned to press down on a mechanical lever because every time it did so, it was rewarded with a piece of food. The reward reinforced the behavior, increasing the probability it would happen again. According to the principles of operant conditioning, a given pattern of behavior can be created or intensified if it is associated to a reward, or conversely, lessened when associated with punishment. The principles of operant conditioning also apply in human societies. For example, a salesman who has achieved his sales target gets a bonus which will reinforce his actions. The ability to learn enables living things to adapt to changes in their environment. It is due to this ability that man has outshone every other living thing in terms of conquering and adapting to a plethora of habitats and different situations. Let's get back to that innate and acquired matter. In human beings, it would seem that all behavior patterns are both dependent on heredity and influenced by learning. Nature and culture contribute each in their own way to give us the power to adapt and grow. A child inherits a genetic heritage that identifies him to the Homo species and makes him look like his parents. But no sooner is he born than a socialization process is set in motion, to conclude only at his death. Man is a social being. He owes his development largely to his contacts with others. It's up to him whether he establishes bonds of cooperation or of rivalry. Who hasn't seen a flock of migrating birds, a herd of cattle, a swarm of bees, or a school of fish? Like many animal species, humans live in groups. They gather together voluntarily in societies. They cooperate in order to meet various objectives related to their shared needs and concerns. A great number of animal species prefer living in groups because of the many advantages it offers them. First, group life provides a better defense against predators. Also, an animal will usually find food easier if it is in a group than on its own. And animals who live in groups can build extraordinary constructions. A colony of beavers is able to build a dam, a feat a single beaver could not do on its own. However, in spite of the advantages of cooperation, rivalries do arise among the members of a group when it comes to the resources they need in order to survive. Such resources as food, safe shelters to spend the night or make a nest, or sexual partners for mating. As long as these resources are plentiful, there is little competitiveness. But should a resource become scarce, the animals will compete for it fiercely. Conflicts between members of a same species will almost never result in death, and the combatants are seldom injured. As a rule, the fights begin by threat behavior postures designed to intimidate the opponent and make it back down. When neither of the animals will yield, the threats escalate into a ritualized battle. When one of the adversaries realizes that it is going to lose the battle, it displays submissive behavior, which the winner respects. According to some ethologists, these acts of submission play a similar role among humans. A victim who becomes submissive inhibits all future aggressive behavior in the rival. This behaviorist response has lost its meaning, however, with today's fast-killing, long-range weaponry. The attacked is no longer able to appeal to the opponent's feelings. Henri Laborit, an eminent French biologist, noticed that the flight or fight behavior observed in animals existed in man as well. In his view, man will adopt a flight behavior pattern in order to avoid punishment, or conversely to satisfy his desire for pleasure. For example, a young girl desperately wants to become a dancer, but her parents forbid it. They force her to undertake medical studies instead. So she leaves home to be able to fulfill her ambition. If flight is not possible, man will display a defensive, aggressive behavior. A person whose lover leaves him will display this type of behavior. However, social, cultural interdictions generally forbid human beings from resorting to violence. When a human being learns that he can neither flee nor fight, and that all action is ineffective, he becomes inhibited. According to Laborit, this third behavior pattern, called action inhibition, often underlies anxiety and psychosomatic illnesses. For example, every day, a worker sees his foreman, whom he loathes. He cannot beat him up because he would be arrested by the police. He cannot flee because he would then be unemployed. So day after day, he is in a state of inhibition of action. Since he cannot take his aggressiveness out on others, he will take it out on himself, on his stomach, causing an ulcer, or on his heart and blood vessels, triggering high blood pressure. The man could express his aggressiveness to himself in a much more destructive way. He could commit suicide. But man is imaginative. He can, through creative endeavor, find ways to counter anxiety, inevitably brought on by inhibition. The study of human behavior is a valuable source of information that interests a great deal of people, including your employer. Before hiring you, your attitude, aptitudes, motivations, and personality go through the third degree. It's normal for employers to have their requirements, but the workers also have theirs. There are a great many things that motivate us besides security and income, and that contribute to our behavior at work and our satisfaction in life. Work is indisputably the central activity in all our lives. No sooner have we begun to breathe than we begin to work, since every activity that helps to transform matter constitutes work. But work as we generally understand it is the act that leads us to the creation of something, the writing of a book, repairing a car, designing a new product. To accomplish a task, a person needs to be motivated. In bees and other social insects, chores like cleaning, taking care of the queen, and numerous other activities are stimulated by the secretion of chemical substances called pheromones. However, some researchers believe that what prompts man to act, in other words, to work, are internal forces called needs or desires. Among these basic needs, first there are the physiological needs of survival: hunger, thirst, and copulation. Man also needs material and psychological security, love, and affection. Warm and enriching contacts with work colleagues can, for example, appease his need for affection. Beyond the primary needs, researchers have identified other, higher needs that are characteristic of human nature. Among them, self-esteem. It is this need that drives a person to achieve success and to become competent in their work. Then man seeks the respect and admiration of others. In that search, he will often covet a higher social status just for the prestige and reputation that go with it. Lastly, man needs to actualize himself. That is, to use and develop his potential and talents to the fullest. It is through his work that man turns his intelligence, imagination, aptitudes, and various skills to good account. An artist who creates a work of art, a scientist searching for a drug against a disease, or a racing car driver zooming down the track in a race, are all aspiring to achieve their full potential by putting aspects of their personality into what they are doing. But what motivates man above all else is the desire to satisfy his primary needs. A primary need such as hunger or affection must be relatively satisfied before a higher need, such as self-esteem, can become in itself a preponderant and motivating force. Living in poverty and insecurity for years can kill some people's higher needs and cause them to only seek to satisfy their primary needs. In today's industrial society, most jobs are so specialized and segmented that they no longer enable the worker to satisfy his higher needs. With the Industrial Revolution and the advent of mass production, that is, the production of large quantities of goods at low cost, the sole aim of work management was to increase efficiency and productivity. At the turn of the century, an American engineer by the name of Frederick Taylor undertook scientific research to reduce the production time and boost output on assembly lines. The work management system he proposed is now called Taylorism. This system consists of breaking the work down into its most elementary motions while eliminating unnecessary tasks. The worker had to follow the instructions he was given to the letter. Taylorism also includes a bonus wage system to encourage workers to improve their performance. Taylorism proved dehumanizing because it completely ignored man's motivations. The vast subdivision of work it advocated seldom allowed the worker to feel the satisfaction seeing his labor rewarded by a finished product. To counter the negative effects of Taylorism, industrial engineers and sociologists suggested that the work assigned to the men be varied, alternated, enlarged. In their view, the worker should be able to perform several tasks related to a same project. These tasks were to also allow the individual to continue to learn and to use his own judgment. In future, we can expect that through computerization, many of these tasks will become automated. Let's hope that man will be able to use these new tools judiciously, alleviating the most tedious tasks and letting him take his motivational needs into account. Sociobiology is trying to reduce human behavior to a series of reactions to objective stimuli. But there is always something that slips by undetected. It will always be more difficult to measure what motivates a person than the acceleration of an apple falling from a tree.